Yes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Oh man, I've been waiting for this one. This the one I've been waiting for, ladies and gentlemen. This is what I'm talking about.
This
right
one?
here.
This one?
Maybe not, but it's just you got to say it like that, man, to make people get excited, man.
You definitely
You got to talk about it like this is it. This the one I've been waiting for, ladies and gentlemen. This is how we're gonna do it. So I'm excited for this, man. We got distinguished journalists coming in just a moment, you know what I'm saying? But ladies and gentlemen, we are back to the grill again. The grill again. Back to the grill again. The grill again. It is season 4, episode 11.
11, fam, already.
It's 11. Yeah. This is what we do. What will we do? Season 4, episode 11. Some of y'all just starting your podcast off. Hey, stick with it. It's fun. It takes time. You build up a fan base. This is new for us going live on YouTube, so we're building that up. So I think I forgot to check how many subscribers we have, but we're no longer the 144 click. So I think we got about 40
more.
We the
180 click. We the 180 click.
180? We doing the 180 right now, baby.
Actually,
that's
it. 179. I'm just speaking it into existence.
Man, look, somebody subscribe to the channel. We need
180
right now to subscribe to the channel. But we appreciate our day ones. Those of you who listen online, we still get a lot of downloads from the traditional podcast medium. So we're grateful for that. Thank you for that. Yes. Appreciate that. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you got to get that Serial Killer Smiling Pictures. Don't forget about that. That album is everywhere. You can get an album. Appreciate the feedback I've gotten. Let's get that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I am excited to introduce to y'all a personal friend of mine who is a distinguished journalist. He has been covering, as a matter of fact, I'm going to let you tell, he'll tell you how much he's been covering journalism. But I want to bring in a friend of mine, ladies and gentlemen. This is distinguished journalist Jon Ward. Thanks for coming on Cross Examine, bro.
Appreciate you. Man, I'm excited to be here, and I'm loving the StreamYard YouTube setup. I might have to steal that.
Hey, bro, this is the joint. We just kind of getting started. So we just started our YouTube channel this year, like actually 2-3 months ago. So we pretty much are a traditional podcast, and we're really blessed, man. We get way more downloads. We get thousands of downloads a month, man. I'm still shocked when I go in and see that we get a lot of downloads. So we're grateful for that. But so we're new at this, so we're still trying to build this up. So some people are just fat-headed and don't want to come in and subscribe to the channel because they used to listening to it on the way they do it. But we're going to slowly build that, man, for fun. It's fun to do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be interviewing Jon Ward. We're going to allow you to ask any questions. You know, if you got questions in the comment section, go ahead and ask any questions that you have. If it's a good question, I'm going to pose it. If it's a dumb question, only you and the Lord will know. So just know that. Like, I'm not putting it up if it's not a crazy question. But I'm excited, man. But before we jump in to learning about who you are, Jon, and just sort of your career in journalism, which as people find out, they're going to be like, wow, he's done some things. I want all of us to just have a brief conversation about, so I was watching something recently, and it was a 60-minute clip. And in the clip, it was entitled The Great Resignation. So I thought, let me click on this and see what this is. And I watched about 12 to 15 minutes. And it's essentially talking about thousands, millions of people quitting their jobs. And not just demographically, not just like what we call Generation Z, but just people are quitting their jobs, not wanting to go to work. And there was one guy who has a company in Greenville, South Carolina, apparently is starting to become a new hub. They're getting people to move to Greenville to be a part of the community there. I was surprised at them saying that right now a lot of jobs are in employees' hands. Like it's almost, they said it's almost like a take this job and shove it. People are quitting, not working. And so, Jon, as a journalist, you cover a lot of things. How do you see this? And what do you think about this as a journalist, thinking through the phenomenon of people not working, just as a result of COVID and just all of these things?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you were asking me, I'm not sure if you're asking me what the results will be or the causes are. I mean, I think the causes are obvious. You know, there's a couple obvious ones, but I think there's others that I don't fully understand, and you might help me understand them. But you know, obviously telework, right? That's a big COVID has accelerated telework and companies' tolerance for telework. So now people can work from wherever a lot of times. I mean, I think you also have to look at the government assistance that went out during COVID. You know, there was at least one major, maybe two major government relief bills that sent money to people. You had the child tax credit that went out to people last year. That was increased, so people were actually getting, you know, money in their bank accounts every month, not just a refund at tax time, and that was a big boost for people too. You know, and so all of that has led people to do what you were just saying, feel like, you know, I don't need necessarily. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people just anecdotally, business owners who say it's hard to find people to fill jobs. I'm sure you guys have too. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's going to continue, but it's part of the reason why I think there are some economic headwinds. You know, but I don't know anything much deeper than that. I don't know what there is culturally to this. Do you?
So I think you could make a case for a deeper cultural issue where we're just in a different age. It's what I've called the age of entitlement. So a lot of what you see happening is the tide is turning where the power and the people who are trusted to make decisions has drastically shifted. And so what COVID did was businesses, you know, we're a capitalistic society. For businesses to stay afloat, you have to let people work from home.
Right.
What COVID did was it created expectations that people barely had prior to COVID. So now when people, and I think people are understanding for the first time, wow, I actually have equity. I may not have equity in terms of stock in the company, but I have equity in that now I realize you need me. You need me to be able to sustain your business. Your business can't survive without me. So what you get is people are now playing that value up. So now to get a job, it has to be, I want to telework. Like you're giving your demands and people are getting them. So I think a lot of it is there's a cultural shift that's been happening in terms of who gets the power, who has the equity. And now with COVID making it so people can't be together, you have to do that. Now you have people demanding a particular way of working, or else they're just not going to work because they are getting some money. I don't know how sustainable it is because
Right.
if you have a job or you have you know, a house or a family, and you don't have any other source of income, good luck, because unemployment is only going to be able to sustain for so long. But it's a fascinating turn of events. It's almost like when I was a realtor, you know, your dad was a realtor, so you know the realtor. There's seasons when you evaluate real estate, you think it's a buyer's market or a seller's market, right? So there are some seasons, like I just bought a home in July. It was a seller's market, which meant there were less homes and more buyers. So so the sellers are getting 50, 100,000 more than what their houses are worth. People are waiving uh, uh, um, home inspections and all of that just to get a home. The same thing is happening economically in businesses where it's an employee's market, not an employer's market. It's really fascinating. Now, Strack, you own a restaurant. Yeah. So you've had to deal with this from the other angle. What's that been like for you?
I think what you're saying is spot on. I mean, it's definitely an employee's market, you know, when you consider the job field. And Biden even talked about that. He was his job or his mindset was to put the advantage back in the employee's hands. And I think there could be some positive things to that as far as coming back to the table to discuss, you know, how much of a benefit we are to each other as employers and employees. But I think it's just gotten out of hand because there hasn't actually been a discussion. It's just been, you guys should be paying them this amount and they should be receiving this amount and this is what they're worth. And now we have this, between inflation and everything else going on, people just, there's people who just don't even want to work anymore. They've gotten used to just being home. They've gotten used to, getting food and just being home. So all of that plays in. I think there's a bunch of different scenarios that we're talking about here, but it all plays in.
I've also read, one argument that I think you'll hear about the cultural deeper reasons for this, which I just remembered seeing recently, is that there's something a little bit inhumane, I guess, about the capitalist society that we live in, to the degree that it's become hyper-capitalist or whatever a critic would call it. And so I think the critique that would be made, which I don't really have a strong opinion on this, but I think there's probably elements of it that have some merit, are just that, in certain sectors and certain jobs, probably people are treated as cogs rather than, in a respectful way, or, I certainly don't think that's true for a lot of jobs. A lot of white collar jobs are not like that. But, if you're in the service industry, or if you're, cleaning hotels, something like that, like, I can definitely see that argument making sense. I just don't necessarily know, like, are women cleaning hotels able to quit those jobs? Because I don't know that that's the case, but
yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, I can tell you in the hospitality field, people are quitting jobs. I mean, they're quitting and they're leaving and they're not coming back. I mean, we've had multiple employees just, especially during COVID time when it was heavy in 2009 or 2020 into 2021. There were employees just going and not showing any interest in coming back. It's happening.
And do you know where they're like ending up? Like, are they finding another job, or how are they making ends meet?
I have no idea. Because most times when that's done, there's no more communication. They don't want to maintain communication. They're just they're sometimes they even feel ashamed of the way that they exited. So that takes place as well. Right. But that's been the common consensus between the restaurants in this area that I've been hearing. So
you're in the Pennsylvania area. So just outside of Philly.
Okay.
Yeah, you made a good point, John. I think when COVID first hit, the people that were the most celebrated were all the people who normally the most ignored, right? Mm-hmm. So it was the bus drivers. It was the people who work at McDonald's. It was the people who put groceries on the shelves, like to stock the shelf. Those were all of a sudden the heroes. Right. I remember, I think we did an episode, this would have been like season 3. I think we did an episode where we were like, wow, the humility of the Lord, right? Where all of a sudden the last has become first and the first has become last. Right. So now the people who people mostly like laugh at, like, yeah, you work at McDonald's. Now you're hoping McDonald's is open. Yeah. Now you need, now you want that. The people who usually are mocked and belittled for what they do are now being celebrated.
Yeah, the least of these were all of a sudden maintaining some type of normalcy for us.
It was fascinating to watch it play out and to watch people be heroes, like, needing nurses and, stuff like, not even doctors, like nurses were being like the go-to. And I think, we live in a I want to be seen, want to be heard society as well, right? So in the cultural milieu of that, you have people finally having a voice, right? When you feel like, so when you talk about the capitalistic society, there's always going to be people who don't have a voice, because if your voice is connected to your capital and you don't have capital, then no one wants to hear your voice. And so now you have a voice. You can say, nah, it's really interesting to watch this play out. I don't know how this will affect the economy in 3 to 5 years. I remember we were warned, like, hey, buy your stuff for your kids quick, because Amazon my wife would go to the grocery store and it would be like, man, there's no milk. There's no, there wasn't like, oh, there's a snowstorm coming. It was just regular old Tuesday. So it'll be interesting. I don't know how sustainable it is, but I think some people just don't care. I don't think some people are really thinking bigger picture, like, hey, I actually have to provide for my family. Or this is going to come back to bite me. So it'll be fascinating to see. But they're calling it the Great Resignation for a reason,
right?
And that'd be interesting. All right, on the other news, which I thought this is hot off the press. So the Supreme Court just shot down the vaccine mandate. They shot it down. It should say 6-3. All right, so they shot it down 6-3, which I didn't know what to expect or where that decision was going to go. I know there are people who are fascinated by that decision. And it's just new, so everyone's talking about. So you had 3 judges who were on the left that gave their dissent, and they basically said, which I thought was interesting, that they felt like non-publicly appointed judges shouldn't have the power to do so because they lack the a biological experience to make that decision. Right? What they were getting at was that OSHA, the organization OSHA, it was basically giving them the power to say, this is what you have to be able to do these vaccine mandates. So shooting it down 6-3, this has just happened. That's a fascinating, and it's going to have a significant fallout because they said upwards of 100 million people would either lose their jobs or have to be tested every 2 or 3 days. Or something, there would be something to that effect if they weren't vaccinated. And now it seems like, I have friends who personally were asking me, what do you think I should do? Because I don't want to get vaccinated or whatever, but I may lose my job. So this just started. The reverberation is going to be incredible. I'd love to know what you guys think, just your visceral thoughts on this decision.
I'm not surprised that the court has a 6-3 conservative majority, and
yeah.
It's I guess maybe the only vote who would be semi-surprising would be Roberts, because he's been tacking to the middle a lot over the last few years.
He has been, yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't strike me as that surprising for that reason. Just that the court has shifted pretty hard to the right since you had the last 3 justices appointed during Trump. So I don't actually have strong opinions about vaccine mandates. I think you could argue it pretty well both ways. I'm very much, a proponent of vaccines. I think, I trust, experts in general. So I know that it's a sensitive topic for a lot of people, and I've had difficult conversations in my own family about this topic. So I think I would probably just say, I think, the numbers show pretty clearly that, if you're vaccinated, you're more likely to get a mild form of the virus. And if you're at risk, you're much less likely to get gravely ill or die from it. So I think that's pretty clearly, demonstrated by basic data. And so, but I would just leave it there. I just feel like people have pretty much made up their minds on this stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the most exhausting things for me over the last several years has been, I guess, seeing the degree to which in an environment where people can pick their statistics or their facts or their sources, it gets pretty hard to have a conversation that's oriented around a shared set of basic fundamental facts. One of the best books I've read on how to potentially fix this is called The Constitution of Knowledge by Jonathan Rausch. I genuinely think that if we don't fix the fundamental problem of how we can agree as a society on what constitutes knowledge and what constitutes, error. And I'm not, and this is not applied to personal belief or what we think about ultimate things or faith matters, anything like that. We're talking about information that is used in the public square to govern how we come to decisions about things that affect all of us, like, government, politics, all that sort of thing. If we can't figure out a set of rules for how we decide what's factual and what's not, I just don't think a lot of our other problems are going to be, we're not going to make a lot of progress on them, because right now the main problem driving most of our issues is that people are in different universes, and everybody is choosing different sources and different authorities for how they, confirm or decide what they think. So that to me is like the existential issue of our times, actually.
Yeah. So when you say that, I mean, I would say people have kind of always done that, right? How do you see it different today?
Sure. I mean, everybody. Sure. Well, let me ask you a question. When you say everybody's always done that, what do you mean by that?
So I think people have often made decisions and decided who to trust, right? So we've had a two-party political system, and people red or blue, right? There's always been red or blue states.
Sure.
There was a point in time in the 1940s. They did, I forgot what organization, what magazine did this, but there was a huge, they censored the public, and like pastors and clergymen were the most trusted people in like 1940. And then in 1970, that wasn't the case, right? So we've always had a fluctuation. Then if you get into the racial dynamics, right? Well, black people only trust these type of people. And then, conservative whites have, you can make a case that ever since the conservative church lost, or conservative is Christianity lost the Darwin trials, right? In Tennessee, you can make a case that since then that a good bit of what we call fundamentalist Christians have moved away from the public square and all of it, right? So then you get the neo-evangelical movement with like Billy Graham and the guy who started, I forgot his name, who started Christianity Day. And so I think there's always been a who do I trust on one level. But I would agree right now it is bananas in terms of it. So when I say it's always been that way, I think there's always been a level of sort of agreed upon epistemology. I agree with these people, I'm going with them. A tribalism, as they call it, right? I'm with this tribe, I'm with that tribe. I think that's existed long before this day, but I think this day is definitely different than how it's been. And so that's what I'm getting at by the question.
Yeah. Let me just say, anybody who uses the word epistemology is hitting my androgynous zones, or my erogenous zones. Not my androgynous zones, my erogenous zones. Yeah.
We get it in over here. We intellectual. We gangsters, but we intellectuals.
Well, I mean, epistemology and media ecology are two of my favorite subjects. You bring Gatorade in here, he'll talk your ear off about Marshall McLuhan, right? Yeah. But I agree with you. I think I was trying to think of a way to like visualize what I'm talking about, and I did get kind of a visualization for what I think I'm trying to communicate, which is, you're exactly right. Like back in when Jesse Jackson ran for president in the 80s, the Rainbow Coalition, that's like a helpful slice of history, right? Because you do have African-American Black voters who are, siding with the Rainbow Coalition, right? And that's just one slice of a complex and diverse, set of constituencies in American politics, right? So yeah, you did have on one level people who trust certain people and they don't trust other people. But I think the visual picture to have is that you have this debate with certain groups trusting some people more than others, but it's all resting on top of a substrata, like a terra firma, like layers of soil. And those layers of soil are layers of information and knowledge that are widely agreed upon, that everybody uses as a reference point for, the debate. Like they're going to have a debate over how to implement or strategize or what to do with a certain set of facts. But the set of facts that they're debating are not generally disputed, right? Now we're in a place where you try to have a conversation or a debate with somebody, you're making an assertion based on a set of facts, which are facts that that person doesn't agree on at all. So like all of the foundation of knowledge that people used to generally agree upon is kind of exploded. And, the Scopes monkey trial is a good example too, because that was an issue where parts of the substrata that everybody rested their, debate on got reorganized, right? And so people did have competition over what composed that foundation. And the Scopes Monkey trial was part of that competition. But that competition was generally a slow-moving process. And once something got shifted in that substrata, it usually stayed that way, right? Because like the Scopes Monkey trial, there was before and after. Before, the things were a certain way, and after, things are a certain way. Now, I think the ferment is so constant and ongoing that all of the facts that we talk about all of the time are always changing in terms of people's, a set of agreements. So it's a disorienting time in many ways. And I certainly haven't, oriented myself to how to talk to people in this new world. But I'm trying to adapt and not just wish that things were the old way,
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point. I think another illustration to make the point is this idea of neopronouns, right? So neopronouns are essentially individual pronouns that people make up of themselves. I actually just watched something earlier today where there's like them, their, they, and these are described as individual pronouns that you make up for yourself to describe who you are. So there's really, if everyone determines their pronouns, and then there's no foundation for truth. So I don't know how to relate to you. It's a breakdown in fundamental human relationships because I don't even know how to relate to you, especially if the society is moving towards an anti-offense society, right? Where the goal is not to offend people, then I don't even know how to talk because things are so, there's no objective truth, even in the English language as it relates to like something as prevalent and simple as pronouns. So I think that and what you're describing to me is the difference between the Enlightenment period, the Age of Reason, where you have the scientific method that's based on like, hypothesis, analysis, you test it, and then you come with facts. Where now people don't have a scientific method today. So you have this mass confusion of, I'm used to things, as you said, based on an agreed upon sort of epistemology, and then let's debate that, versus now we can't even agree upon the foundation of fact. And that's the culture that we live in. It's everything that's factual is, for not everyone, but a lot of people are making it individually based. So what's factual is no longer what we all agree upon. It's tested and proven. It's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, even what reason is anymore, we don't even agree upon what reason is anymore.
Yeah.
We try to because sometimes arguments are displayed and sometimes they're packed with truth that's just denied because it doesn't fit a narrative that I've embraced. That's just the reality to it as well. So, and when you're dealing with something like this, you're talking about people's bodies. You're talking about putting something in people's bodies. It's very personal.
You're talking about the vaccine right now, right?
The vaccination, yeah, because with this whole topic was built off of the mandate, the Supreme Court ruling 6-3. One of the things that stood out for me, with OSHA in particular, the argument that stood out for me was they're set up to set up safety and health protocols at work, right? How can OSHA determine what happens to me outside of work, though? Because the vaccination would be both at work and outside of work. This is something that would translate to my life outside of work as well. So, and many people would just say, well, you'd be healthier. I get the argument, but it's OSHA, again, determining what I do at work for health and safety, now all of a sudden being given the okay to determine what happens to me outside of work as well. So that's an argument that stuck out to me.
And then once you get that leverage, where do you go, right? Once you get the approval to do that, then you're really into George Orwell's 1984.
Gets a little scary.
That's what I can see the arguments from both sides. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with distinguished journalist Jon Ward, and we just jumped into conversation. I want to pull back a second. I think it's important that you get to know a little bit more who he is. So I want to just ask some questions about Jon. You've been in journalism for some time, and we're going to talk about your time in the White House, what it was like. It was, for me, I'll just give this anecdote and then we'll get to this. It was fascinating for me to see, President at the time, President Obama, call on you and have you stand up in front of the whole country and to some degree the world, because American politics, people pay attention to it, and watching you ask questions and go back and forth sometimes with Obama. So we're going to talk about what that was like being in the White House and that type of thing. But first, I want to back up a little bit. How long have you been in journalism?
It's been just over 20 years, believe it or not. Yeah. I started in the fall of 2001. I had finished 2 years of teaching at Covenant Life High School. And then
English,
after that,
right? Teaching English.
Yep, teaching English. And then, I kind of just looked for the next thing. And it took me a few months. And then I got hired probably like October, November. So right after 9/11 was when I started. And I was an unpaid intern. I don't know. I probably worked 3 or 4 days a week, waited tables, macaroni grill, real fine dining experience, man.
Hey, for those of you that don't know this, Jon and I go way back. So I remember all of this. We would talk about this.
Yeah,
we were friends. I used to go to Macaroni Grill and get hooked up from time to time. So I remember when you said that, I was like, wow, up at the Rio, right? I haven't thought about that place in 2 decades until you said that. So no, we go back. But, all right, good. So how does being a Christian, how did that impact the way you came into journalism and then affected the way you saw things as a journalist? Because you've seen a lot of stuff. How did being a Christian impact that reality?
Such a big question. I used to talk to, I would talk to like groups of high schoolers or college students. This was a long time ago, probably in the first 10 years of my career. I would have these, I don't know, I'd get asked to speak to this group or that group. And a lot of times it would be a group of young kids from a church. And I would get that question almost every time. But the question was, is it hard to be a Christian and be in journalism? And I have to say, I always found the question to be kind of strange, because it seemed like people had this concept that, and I've had a clearer sense of why I felt this to be strange than I do right now. I wish I had the clarity that I've had in the past. But I thought it was just reflective of a general aversion to being in the world. Like Christ, I think pretty clearly says, it's a paraphrase. It's not a quote from Christ, but the basic saying is be in the world, but not of the world. And then there's be salt and light, right? So I think just temperamentally, I've always really disliked being in any environment where everybody thinks the same thing. And when I was at Covenant Life Church teaching and leading a small group, I was psychologically and emotionally and spiritually suffocating because of the groupthink, which is typical of many small communities of many different points of view. I just don't like being in a place where everybody's kind of agreeing with each other. At least I didn't until things went absolutely insane over the last couple of years. And now it's like, wow, I got more than I asked for. But I would say the other way to answer that question is, I've thought a lot about this question because I'm working on a book that's going to come out in about a year. And it's called Testimony. And I think in the very first few pages, I just kind of outlined that there are a couple of things that I took away from the faith that I was taught. One is, that the message of Christ is a message of sacrificial love. I think another is just sort of the upside down nature of the way that Christ tells us to be in the world, which is you find your life by losing it, and you are strong when you are weak. And I think that has a lot of application to how we think and talk and act around the ideas and issues of power. And then I think, Jesus talked a lot about truth. And so I have always felt like Christianity is a religion and a faith that prizes truth. And so to me, journalism really appealed to me because it was on the side of truth. It wasn't on the side of this group or that group. It was on the side of follow the facts and let the chips fall where they may. And that appealed to me very much, just the kind of person that I am. And so, yeah, I could say more. I mean, I think in the book, I'm going to lay out an argument that there are elements of the Christian right now who just in the last 10 years have really embraced this idea of a cultural mandate, 7 mountains, the New Apostolic Reformation, taking these mountains of culture for Christ. And, they've actually changed their theology of the end times from, I always get pre-mill, post-mill mixed up, but like they used to be rapture folks. Now they're cultural mandate folks, which I find kind of wild. But the basic implication is we're going to take culture for Christ. And my thing is, like, I've been doing that for 20 years. And like 2005, I took a worldview training course from Chuck Colson. Like I was trained. It was called the Centurion course, right?
Nice.
And so I've been slowly marching up this mountain. And I have some things to share, but it kind of seems like a lot of these folks in that world are not listening. So that's been frustrating.
Yeah. So you gave us a little bit of a brief sort of synopsis, but walk us through your journey, because you've worked for a couple of different publications and worked your way up. So I think when people hear journalism, they just think whatever. People are saying they're journalists because they have a blog, but no, that's not the situation with you. You worked for, so start us with, where did you start first? And then what's been the journey for you at different places that you've worked in and what you've covered?
Yeah, journalism to me is a craft and a trade. And I actually like the term that nobody uses anymore, which is newspaper man. Because when I started out 20 years ago, I worked for a physical newspaper. We did have a website, but that was relatively new. I mean, all of us probably, I don't know, exactly what everybody's age is here, but I think we're all enough to remember life before the internet.
Yes.
And so, to our kids, that's really weird, but it is the fact. So I started out at the Washington Times, which was the ugly stepsister to the Washington Post here in DC. Conservative, owned by a cult leader, Sung Young Moon of the Mooney cult over in Korea.
Yeah, I didn't know that he owned that.
Oh,
wow.
Yes. And there were many church members who kind of populated the newsroom in different, different jobs. Usually not the most influential jobs, but here and there you'd meet somebody, and after a while you'd realize, oh, they're part of the Unification Church.
Wow.
And so I learned the craft of journalism there because I spent 8 years there. I worked for no pay, and then I worked as a clerk and got paid very little money. And so for a couple of years, I was just going out and doing whatever. I would go with cops on a ride along through different neighborhoods of Ward 6, 7, 8. I would go to a zoning meeting in Montgomery County. I'd go to a Prince William County Board of Supervisors meeting, which, let me tell you, was boring. I'd go to Metro Board hearings. I would write articles about the weather. I would write articles about potholes. And the new pothole repair machine that the DC government's rolling out. So all this just basic stuff. And every day I was doing it, and every day I was being taught, make the calls, check the facts, make sure you get it right, spell the names correctly, and so you do all that. You learn how to structure the story. You learn how to get the most important information up top with the lead. You learn the nut graph, which is the broader context. You learn how to attribute. You learn how to make sure what's on the record's on the record and what's not. All of these things. And so you're trained in this by other reporters, by editors. Your copy, which is what you write, goes through the editor, goes to the copy editor. So I really learned the craft there. And then after a couple of years, this is actually a funny story. I was trying to figure out how do I get ahead, and I realized other people were going and covering state legislatures in our newspaper. So I think it was the new year in 2005 or 2006. It was 2006. I'm newly married, right? And so I'm like, I gotta up my game a little bit here. And so I just start showing up in Annapolis at the state legislature. Nobody told me to go there. Nobody said, hey, you're the new reporter out at the state legislature. We already had a reporter covering the state legislature in Maryland, but he had gotten almost fired in December for getting blackout drunk and groping a lobbyist at a holiday party. So he wasn't going to say anything to me. So I had an open door to just go out there to Annapolis and start, doing that job. So I did a good job that year. I covered a great Senate campaign between Mike Steele, who was a black Republican, and Ben Cardin. And the primary was great, too, because it was Ben Cardin, who's now the senator from Maryland, against Kwasi Mfume, who was the former head of the NAACP. Wow. And the fact that the Democratic establishment chose Cardin over Mfume pissed off a lot of black Democrats in PG County. So I got to understand the ways that Maryland politics is shaped by different power centers. You got PG County, you got Southern Maryland, you got Baltimore, you got Montgomery County. And all of that was super, I began to get interested in how this worked, right? Because understanding power, I'll tell you that was something I realized I did not know jack squat about. After I got out of college and taught high school literature for 2 years, I wanted to write, but I realized I didn't know anything about the world. I didn't know how power worked. I didn't know how the world worked. So I was like, I'm going to go cover the world, write about the world. And, if I end up writing creatively in the future, I'll have something to say. So then I got assigned to cover Congress in 2007. Did not know what the hell I was doing. So after about 3 months of running around like a chicken with its head cut off on Capitol Hill, they were like, you know what? Go cover the White House, because all of our good reporters are going to cover the presidential campaigns. We need a warm body at the White House. So, John, you go over there. I mean, literally, I think that they didn't say that, but that's the way I felt about it. So, but that led to 3.5 years of traveling the world, going on Air Force One, going on not Marine One, because only the president goes on that, but helicopters, Africa, Europe, Asia, all of these great, amazing places. And it was drinking from a fire hose of information because it's something different every day. But that was a great experience. Then I went to work for Tucker Carlson, which is a whole other story.
We're coming back to that.
Yeah. And I did that for a year and a half.
We're coming back.
Yeah. And then I left that. I went to work for 2 weeks for Rupert Murdoch's terrible idea to run an iPad-only thing. And 2 weeks into that, I got hired at the Huffington Post. Was there for 3 years. Then I went to Yahoo News in 2014. I've been there for 8 years almost, 7.5. So, yeah. So I've been all over ideologically. Conservative newspaper, conservative website, liberal website. Yahoo News is center left. So.
Okay. So I'd love to give us something that you alluded to this, but in the years of working for the White House and traveling, what are some of the things that you thought, wow, this is a moment? For you personally, not even just media, but just, this is a moment. Maybe a conversation with Obama or watching what were, give us a couple times where you were like, wow, this is a moment. This is, if it's a story, fine. But it just, what was it like personally, wow, I'm drinking from this fire hose, but I'm with the most powerful man in the world. I'm around these people and you're learning a lot. What were some of the moments that you felt like, wow, this is crazy?
Well, I mean, there is one pretty good story. We were in Liberia, and there's this thing called the protective pool, which is a group of about 8 reporters that travel with the president at all times. And the reporters in that group rotate. So like every news organization tries to get in that group, and there's like 35 or 40 news orgs in the group. And so you rotate in and out. So I was in the pool that day, and we went to the presidential palace in Liberia, and we're driving through the streets of Liberia, which are still pretty bombed out from the civil war that they had there. It was pretty bleak, but we're flying through it, so there's not a lot of time to like see anything. We get to the presidential palace, and which is kind of run down, and then the President Bush at the time, goes to a lunch on the back lawn, and those of us in the pool are like held in a room in the palace for a while. And I had told the president's people, there's something that my editors want me to see. There was going to be like a song, whatever. Like they were going to sing a song from Bush, and I was like, I need to see that. So can you take us out for that? So they're like, fine. So they come in at a certain point. We're all just sitting around, and they say, hey, you got to get out there because the song is going to be soon. So there are 2 sets of doors, and there's a set of double doors, and then there's a separate door on each side of the double doors. Okay. So I go through the first set of double doors, and I'm kind of at like a slow run. And then I kind of like lower my shoulder, cut through. I go through the first set of double doors, and then I decide to go through the single door to the left of the second set of doors, which is a glass of window, like a plate glass window. So I shatter the glass, which is floor to ceiling glass, and end up on the other side of the window with just pieces of glass everywhere around me in the presidential palace in West Africa.
So you walked through the glass.
I looked down at myself, and I was like checking for, am I bleeding out anywhere, right? I was cut a couple places, but nothing too terrible. The president's doctor came and treated me. I remember the president's doctor had to have me like take my pants off to make sure I didn't lacerate myself anywhere important. And I turned out okay. I don't know who paid for the window, but I didn't pay for it.
Right. I've seen people do that with screens. I've never seen it done with an entire glass window.
It was.
You take the cake.
It was bizarre. I think I did think of a moment when I was walking through Farragut Square when I was working for Tucker, I believe. Kurt, you know me well enough to know, like, I came from an environment in which the only ambitions from our parents was for us to be good Christians.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of positioning of us to go out and do a whole lot. It was just like, you can go to college, you can go to community college, that's great. You can work for the church, that's great. We don't really care, So it was like, I wanted to do more than that. And it took me a while to own that and operationalize it. And then I guess this was probably like 10 years into my career or so, 9-10 years. And I just remember walking through Farragut Square, and I'd had a good year. And I just had this thought that was pretty conscious. I was like, I'm going to make it in this career. Like, I kind of had to pinch myself. I was like, I'm actually going to make it in this career. Like, I think I can actually make a living doing this job and like keep going. And that was like a big moment for me. Of course, life throws curveballs at you. And like, now I'm in a place of my career where it's 10 years later, I'm 44 years old. I've got 5 kids, and I don't know what the future holds. And I don't know the future of journalism or the country. So, you always have to reassess your certainty about the future. But that was a nice moment. And there's many others.
10 years in?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for most of us don't know what it's like. What is it like to be in a White House press briefing? And what's it like to be called on by the president and you stand up and you're asking a question that the world is watching you? Like, talk about how do you get exactly right? I remember watching you being like, look at Wheezy. I forgot who I hit. I was like, bro, are you watching this? I said, Weezy is on if the whole world is watching our dude ask Obama this question. I don't even remember what the question was. I was like, look at my dude.
Yeah.
Because I remember all the conversations that you and I had about the transition. And I was at Covenant Life, but I was coming from a different background. So I never bought it. I didn't grow up in all of it. So I always kind of was my own man in it. And that's why a lot of things didn't faze me when they all fell out. I was like, all right, well, we're going to keep it moving. But I remember the journey for you. I was a part of that as your friend. You were in my wedding. I was in your wedding. I mean, I was a part of that journey. So just to see you on TV was like, dag, my dude is asking Obama a question. So what is that like? We've all seen West Wing or these types of shows, but what's that like? How do you talked about the pool, being in the reporters pool over internationally. What's that like in the White House? How do you get selected for that? And do you know if you're going to be asked questions ahead of time? Like, give us sort of what that's about.
Yeah, I didn't know beforehand. I kind of feel like it was a bigger deal back then. I kind of feel like the White House press corps is not as prestigious as it used to be. I think that's part of journalism in general being distrusted more, the media being valued less, trusted less. So I think I kind of came along at the tail end of a time when the media and the White House press corps were prestigious. And that particular question to Obama was in the East Room, which is a large, very ornate and formal room. There's portraits of Washington and Lincoln, I believe, on the wall. And, it's decorated in a very sort of, probably like 18th century fashion. So it's not like the briefing room, which is smaller, well lit, and like modern. And that was, I think, his second press conference. So there was a lot of competition to try to get, questions in. Over a president's 4 years in office, like, people get less pressed. And Will Ferrell put it this way, in modern parlance, thirsty. People get less pressed about getting a question in a press conference. So that was like a high profile moment. I asked him about stem cell research. And I was actually proud of the follow-up I asked, which was, when you have decisions about these things, is the criteria solely driven by, I think I said something like, is it driven solely by science, or is it a balancing act between science and morality or ethics or something like that? So it was kind of a subtle pushback against the idea that science is the only criteria. And I didn't feel too nervous about that one. I remember a couple other, I was nervous, but I remember a couple other ones. I think I got called on by Bush one time and felt like I completely bungled the question and like didn't even like speak English. And that felt, embarrassing. But that was an exciting moment. And I actually have one or two really great photos of that moment, which are somewhere on a hard drive in my house, which I need to find.
So you've kind of said this a little bit, but what would you say now is the most difficult challenge in journalism?
Yeah, it's the lack of trust and the lack of consensus on what constitutes knowledge. Bottom line. It's the Wild West. Like, the internet has torn down all order, and there are some positive benefits of that, but I would say by and large it has been net a negative, just like the epistemological effect of the internet. Yeah.
So from the inside, you're able to see this coming. When do you feel like that transition really hit?
Yeah, there's a lot of books that are going to be written on this, history books, whatever. But, I saw it when I started at the Times. When I started my career, I saw it because, our newspaper was slow to embrace internet, slow to embrace its own website, slow to embrace blogs, slow to embrace podcasts. So I was, as a young reporter, me and my other young colleagues were always pushing for, we got to file, as stuff happens. We can't wait to put it in the newspaper for tomorrow morning. So that, and like 2008, 2009, I was interviewing, Obama officials about the fracturing of the media, about how like the gatekeepers had been destroyed and how the big networks and the big newspapers didn't control the agenda anymore. So that was a hot topic over 10 years ago.
Wow.
And then if you'd have to do a really close analysis of the last decade, because the last decade is when things kind of hit hyperspeed. Because pull up a graph sometime of how many people in America and in the world have smartphones, like the rate of acquisition or the rate of ownership. That graph was really low 10 years ago, and that graph has gone up like really fast. So all of that means that the means of production for distributing information has been completely revolutionized, as has the way that people consume information. So like the means of production and the means of consumption have both been completely revolutionized in a historic way over the last 10 years. And very few people, I think, understand how radically that has changed our world. And I think we're going to be dealing with the fallout from that for decades. And we're living through it right now. So I think all of that is like, what makes it challenging.
I have two questions for you, John. One is, how much do you believe media is consumed by politics? And then also, do you believe there's a resolution to this issue that you're talking about, not having a consistent understanding of what is true? Let's just say it that way. That's not exactly how you said it, but and if so, what do you think could be that resolution?
What was the first question? I'm sorry.
How much is media consumed by politics?
When you say media,
media like journalism, Fox News, CNN, okay. Politics tends to be at the forefront.
Yeah. No, you're right, and it's unfortunate because it shouldn't be. But people love soap opera, and consumers love soap opera, and news organizations who own them and run them and make the most money off them love to make more money. So politics is not too expensive to produce coverage of. I mean, there's certain areas of it that can be expensive, but generally there's always something happening, and there's always something that's kind of like cliquey or controversial or adversarial, and doesn't require a lot of legwork or time to dive into understanding the details and the nuance, and then educating the reader or the viewer about the ins and outs. It's more just like, oh, this person said this crazy thing about this person, and now they're doing this back. Like, that's the soap opera. So it's kind of easy to cover. It makes money. People like it. And so those are the main reasons why profit-driven media serves up mostly that kind of stuff. That's why you need more nonprofit media, more government subsidized media. You need other business models for how to deliver information to people. As far as how to fix it goes, I do think, going back to what I said about John Rausch's book, The Constitution of Knowledge, I think that's the first book of many on this topic. But I just think we have to work as a society on figuring out, how do we all agree on a set of rules for what is knowledge and what is not. And I don't really know how that process is going to work itself out going forward. But I don't see any other way to fix what we have going on right now. Because until you kind of pull back and say, okay, let's stop like fighting over this issue or that issue or this team versus that team, we got to like work on establishing that that's substrata again, so we can actually have a coherent conversation that at least is going somewhere. Because right now, you got these people over here talking to these people, and you got these people over here talking to these people, and they're basically just saying to these people how bad the other people are, and that leads to violence. And so it might be that like we have to go through more upheaval in our country. It might be that there's a cost that has to be paid for people to realize we gotta work our way out of that. I hope that's not the case, but that's one thing I'm concerned about.
Now, there's always been different demographics that trust media. I know as a black man and growing up, you always kind of have a distrust for I'll say corporate media, right? Which would be major magazines, newspapers, the big dogs. You just don't trust them because you've been a product of their lies at times, or representation of your culture in ways that are not consistent with the even statistics of society, right? But what would you say? I feel like Trump, when Donald Trump became president, he ushered in a new level, or accelerated the fake news sort of perspective. What would you say from the inside as a reporter has been the Trump effect on what you're talking about?
I'm really glad I didn't bring Trump up first.
Yeah.
No, I really am.
I was planning. You knew I was going to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, but I'm glad you brought it up because it really is an important part of the story. If you go back to the post-World War II era, if you look at somebody like Barry Goldwater, who ran for president in '64 and got demolished by LBJ, a year after
Kennedy's assassination.
Kennedy was killed, right? I just forgot the guy's name. Goldwater. So Goldwater, he was one of the first really anti-establishment Republicans, because during the World War II era, there was like Yuval Levin has written a good book on this, which I can't remember the name of, but just there was a lot of consolidation and a lot of uniformity in our society at that time. We all pulled together, rowed in one direction. But there began to be a strain inside Republican politics that was anti-establishment, anti-elite, and anti-media. And that was in the 60s. And that kind of percolated and kind of ebbed and flowed for the next several decades. Reagan did a fair amount of media bashing, but the power dynamic was so much in the media's favor at that time. Like a good example, like I wrote a book called Camelot's End. Ted Kennedy did this crazy interview when he was about to run for president in 1980 that like it went so badly in the first 5 minutes that if it had happened today, there would have been a press secretary there. There wasn't anybody there with him then. And the press secretary would have cut off the interview. And not only did that not happen then, he continued to do the interview, and then they asked for another interview to try to make it better. Like that would never happen today. But that was the media's kind of power then. The 90s, you saw a great increase in sort of polarization, politics as combat. Clinton was polarizing, the rise of talk radio on the right, the rise of Newt Gingrich in the House, weaponizing language, weaponizing politics. That's really when you start to see an uptick in this narrative of anti-media, anti-establishment from the right. And so I think from that point on, the relationship, especially with talk radio, the relationship between white conservatives and the media, the mainstream media was very strained. And that got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And it was a sick relationship for many, many years. Trump came along in 2015. And if that relationship was like a tree branch that connected, several 100 million Americans to a reality-based world of facts, Trump came along and took that branch that was already kind of dying, snapped it in half. And he took the people who followed him and he said, don't believe these people, only believe what I say. And so that was a total switch. That moment and that process of living in a world dictated by a constitution of knowledge, which is a widely diffuse system of knowledge production, driven by institutions and groups that rely on best practices, for lack of a better word, taking them out of that world and into an alternative universe where whatever one person says is what is real. So that was and then of course you have a whole media echo chamber that kind of builds up around that amplifies whatever he says and demonizes anyone who disagrees and hounds them and six digital mobs on them. But yeah, that was a pretty big development in the whole story.
So what do you say when you hear like a Ben Shapiro or a Candace Owens, or some people say like the leftist elite media is controlling like the racial narrative? Like from the inside, how do you see, is media controlling the racial narrative? So this is the story that I've heard. Every 2 years obviously for voting for the Senate, they always put up a story of a black guy shot by police, and it's to drum up anger and stuff like that. So like George Floyd happened to fall on a year where, it was a voting year, all these things. Like, do you feel like, would you say that's a legitimate, even if the level of degree is not as much as they say, is there legitimacy to the media promoting a racial narrative, more left driven, that makes America look like a racist nation, and primarily for the political side of helping Democrats get political base?
There's a guy named Goldberg who wrote a book called Bias, Bernie Goldberg, and it was written in 2001. I've read it. Encourage anybody who's watching to read it. Media bias is a real thing, 100%. And anybody who says there isn't, like, is dishonest or doesn't get out enough and doesn't meet people who aren't from, East Coast or West Coast major city. But I think to get into this debate or that debate with a Candace Owens is to miss the fact that Candace Owens' whole business model is to be a provocateur, and to say outrageous things that shed more heat than light. Her whole methodology for success is to be outrageous, not to inform or enlighten people. And I think when you look at somebody like Ben Shapiro was pretty, critical of Trump early on. But like my old boss, Tucker Carlson, if you want to build the audience and make the money and keep the audience, you got to follow the audience. You can't lead the audience. You got to follow the audience, especially on anything that's TV or especially to the degree you're trying to build a mass following. You got to play to the crowd. You can't be a leader. Like, leadership is something that can be exercised inside an institution that is protected from the whims that ebb and flow. Like, leadership is something that people in politics or government can do and then be held accountable for. Accountability in media means you lose your viewership or your audience and you lose money. So that is accountability in one way, but most people don't want to give that up. Most people don't want to give up their power either. But my whole thing with like media now is, okay, yeah, there's a lot of media bias in mainstream media, but look at the practices that have like the craft of journalism. Like, do most people have any clue what goes into producing news content inside an actual news institution? I don't think so. Do they have any idea the difference between that and whatever latest thing Candace Owens is putting out on our YouTube channel? I don't think so. But I do, and I know that there's a vast difference between the two. And in that way, it's not a fair fight because Candace Owens doesn't have, the kind of restrictions on her. She doesn't have an obligation to be accurate. She just has an obligation to make money and build her audience. She's not going to get fired from her job for getting something wrong like most journalists would. So there's just a vast difference between the two.
That's a word right there, an obligation to accuracy. She doesn't have it, right? All right, so on January 5th at 9:15 p.m., you tweeted this. Tucker Carlson attacked me on his show tonight to try to preempt this piece before, all caps, it had ever been published. And then if you go down the thread, you explain that you had a text message conversation with him and so forth. I'm not going to read it. And then there's a clip eventually of him talking about you on his news station. If you don't mind, I'm just going to play the audio of this clip.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask you some questions related to it. All right?
Yep.
January 6th, we had a query the other day from a reporter at Yahoo News called Jon Ward. Jon Ward wanted to know if we thought Patriot Purge, that was our documentary on that day, encouraged violence. And we said, of course it didn't. In fact, the documentary explicitly opposes violence, as this show does. We've consistently denounced political violence of any kind, no matter who commits it, even when places like Yahoo News were giving a pass to the BLM rioters who killed dozens of Americans. So why don't you watch the documentary and you'll find that out, we said. Well, I have watched, he replied. And he sent us this transcription from the documentary. You'll see it now on your screen. This is a quote from the very end of Patriot Purge. Quote, "They're pushing you toward violence and they're doing it on purpose. Tell the truth, build the country, love your family and each other, be the light. That's how it gets better." Now, I wrote that. That's my voiceover at the end of the documentary. But you'll notice in that transcription, there's a series of dots between two of those sentences. These are called ellipses. They signify that something has been removed from the original quote. So what was removed from this quote from our documentary? The phrase, "don't fall for it," was removed. As in, they're pushing you to commit violence, but don't fall for it. That's what we said. We said as clearly as we could. Remain peaceful. Don't commit violence. Love your fellow Americans. Make the country better. If you don't believe us, you can watch the video yourself if you like, and you should. Yahoo News watched it. Then they edited the transcript to suggest we were promoting violence. It's not often you see a clearer example of media dishonesty. What can we learn for that? Well, as it happens, I know Jon Ward very well. He used to work for me. He and his family have been to our house. He's a very nice person. He's a sincere family man. He's also weak. And in a moment like this, weak people get crushed by the forces above them. Weak people conform. They do what it takes. If you want to draw a salary from a big media company right now, you do what you're told. You toe the line. If it comes down to it, you lie. The whole thing is heartbreaking to watch. What an awful moment this is.
Wow. When I saw
Shots
that,
fired.
I thought, I got to get Wheezy on the show. I got into my Bill Cosby voice. I got to get him on the show to talk about this. So let's before you address this directly, let's back up and talk about your relationship. You've mentioned 2 or 3 times you used to work for Tucker Carlson. How did that happen? And then I want to get to what happened in this situation.
2009, I had been at the Washington Times for 8 years and needed to get a different job, make more money. Tucker was starting up a new website called The Daily Caller with his college roommate, Neil Patel, who had worked for Dick Cheney. And I believe Mike Allen was helpful. Yep, Axios now. But at Politico at the time, and he was helpful in probably connecting me with them. And so I talked to them, got hired. And I helped them launch the Daily Caller. Tucker had given a speech in early 2009 at the Conservative Political Action Conference where he said, you can hate the New York Times all you want, but at least they get their facts right. And not enough people on the right practice journalism. It's too much opinion.
And wow, really? Booed. That's what he said back then.
Yeah, and he was booed at this conservative conference for saying that.
This is a popular, for those of you who don't know, it's CPAC, right? This is a very popular conservative conference. Very popular.
So that was the template for the Daily Caller. It would have a conservative orientation, but it would do real journalism. And so I went there, and within about 6 months, it was clear to me that the slow, steady path to success of, doing the hard work day in, day out, not always sexy, was not going to be the general roadmap for the Daily Caller. It was beginning to become more about sensational stories that maybe had this or that relevant fact shaved off or minimized to create a more sensational story. So that was when I started looking for another job, and went to Rupert Murdoch and then HuffPo and then Yahoo. So Tucker was a good boss. He was fun to work for, funny, brilliant, erudite, committed. He was there most days. We had an 8:30 a.m. meeting. And I have been to his house. I went to his house in DC for like a dinner party or two. My wife and kids, not all my kids, but some of them, we visited his family in Maine at their house there, probably 6 years ago. I wouldn't say we were ever friends or close, but we worked together, every week for about a year and a half. Yeah.
All right. So with that backdrop and knowing Tucker Carlson, what happened in this situation? I mean, he has a national, maybe even international platform on his Fox show.
And no, he's the most popular cable news talk show host in the country.
Yeah,
I think about 3 or 4 million viewers a night.
He's a juggernaut. What you thinking,
he's a big
man?
dog.
What are you thinking, John?
Which is not that many people in terms of the country as a whole, but in terms of cable TV, it's
big.
Tops. Yeah.
That's enough to keep you getting money in your pocket, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So what happened? Because I don't want to say, I'm not going to read what you texted, but you clearly explained your position. And I really, you don't have to say it right now, I really appreciated your response to him calling you weak.
Okay.
I don't want you to say that yet. I want to ask that later, but I appreciated that. I said, okay, this is my dude right here. But what happened? What happened in this situation with Tucker Carlson?
So, I guess I should say off the top, he characterized what I did as, I guess, something that was done to protect my job or whatever, or that I was following orders. And that's important to the origins of how I decided to write this article. Nobody told me to write it. It was something I decided to do on my own. In my line of work, it's pretty easy if you want to keep your job and make money or, have job security, to treat politics as a sport, comment on the ups and downs, and not have much skin in the game. For the last 5-6 years, I've decided generally I'm going to try to do solutions-oriented journalism. I'm going to, at times, take a position in terms of like, oh, this reform would be good for the country, or this is true and this is false. So I think that right there is a contradiction of his assertion that I'm doing something that is, I guess the easiest route for me professionally. It would be much easier for me to just sort of sit back and be like, well, this poll said this, like this guy's up, this guy's down. So I decided to write the piece because I don't remember the exact origin of how I came across it, but I became aware that he had put out this 3-part special in which, as I watched it, alarmed me. The claims he was making were that the government, the Biden administration and Democrats want to put people in prison because of their political beliefs, and even torture them. And there was, insinuations that if you are a Republican or you disagree with the Biden administration, you'll be imprisoned, you'll be tortured, and maybe even killed. There's no evidence for this that I'm aware of. Even before I start watching and fact checking the program, I'm fairly confident before I start fact checking the program that there's not a whole lot to it. I will say, as I went through it, he does a good job of using legitimate concerns as a foundation for making claims that do not have evidence or factual basis, but they are grounded in legitimate concerns, and then jump off from the legitimate concern into speculation, insinuation, and outright,
Can you articulate
assertions.
one of those? Could you share like one of those observations that you think are legitimate, but then?
Sure. I think there were 3 that we focused on in the piece. One of them was the way that the FBI has engaged with people that they then arrested on terrorism charges. Using informants or using actual FBI agents, undercover agents. There was a book called The Terror Factory, I believe, by a guy named Trevor Aronson, and Tucker mentions this book on his special. And it documents how in the quote-unquote war on terror, the FBI often led people in a direction or suggested to them actions they might not have taken on their own, raising questions of entrapment. I haven't read the book, but Trevor Aronson is a serious journalist. He works for The Intercept. And so that's been an issue that's been documented as a legitimate concern. I don't know the ins and outs of what, if anything, has been proven in court on that issue, but it's an issue of legitimate journalistic inquiry, at the very least. The other ones are, the reach of the government in digital surveillance. That was an issue that became a big deal during the Bush administration and into the Obama administration. Totally legitimate realm of inquiry, like the power of big tech and big government and, surveillance capitalism online. Huge issues, huge. Is there evidence of people being thrown in prison for social media posts criticizing Joe Biden? Not at all. And so I went through all of the examples, all of the characters that he used in the special to really examine up close the claims. And I tried to write it in a piece that was as clinical as possible. I didn't want any language to be prejudgmental or dismissive. I wanted it to be very analytical. And so I think that's what we did. I think we did a good job of doing that. I wrote the piece for people who watched it and believed it, not for people in my own industry. I am, for the last 6 years, I have made a very conscious choice that I'm not going to do the type, I would say even the last 3 years more than ever, I'm not going to do the type of work that fulfills my ambition for like big articles in terms of like, a magazine style profile of somebody. And I'm definitely not going to do the kind of work that gets chatter in like the Beltway newsletters. Not interested in that. I'm going to write for people in the country who are regular people because I care about the country and I care about those people. So yeah, we did the piece. Monday comes around last week, so about 11 days ago. I texted Tucker on a Monday, pretty ho-hum conversation. You can find all of the text messages that I sent him in a Medium post that I did, which is titled "Why Tucker Carlson Attacked Me on TV." And I've posted all of the texts that I sent him. And I blacked out all the text responses that he sent me because I asked him if he would be willing to be quoted, and he said no. And I've respected that wish of his. Tuesday comes around, our piece is still not published. We're still editing it, getting it ready to be published. We have another text exchange. He's a little more combative. Wednesday comes around, piece is still not published. He reaches out with an answer to a question. He's kind of sounds irritated at this point. We go back and forth. At that point, I had asked him Tuesday and then again Wednesday about whether he felt like there was a way that it could be interpreted as promoting violence. I went and I checked the quote after he responded and realized I had missed that part of the quote where he said, "Don't fall for it." I think as I think back about why I missed that and why it wasn't in my notes, I think it was because the first time through when I listened and read that, or when I watched the video, I was so stunned by what he said, where he said, "They're pushing you towards violence." I was really kind of shocked by that language. Even though he says everything he says after that, the very wording of that statement is troublesome to me. It suggests there is a legitimate basis for violence. They're pushing you towards violence. They are giving you a reason to be violent. That is concerning to me. He does then say everything else he says, which clarifies that he is not specifically calling for violence. So I take him at his word on that. But I think the first time I heard that comment, I was just like, wow. And in the context of the larger special where he's telling people the government wants to throw you in jail and torture you for your political beliefs, you can draw your own conclusions about sort of the atmosphere that's being created here. So he got very upset that he felt like I had gotten the quote wrong. At no time in our text exchange did he say I had intentionally left that out. And we never published a piece that had the incomplete quote, because he went on TV. I think his hours 8 to 9, and somewhere around 8:20, 8:25 was when he said the things you played. Our piece was not published when he said those things. And so for him to say that I had edited the transcript gave the impression that we had published a piece for the world to see in which we had left out the words, "Don't fall for it." When in reality, the piece that we published always had the complete quote. So it seems a bit misleading to me that he would suggest that I did that intentionally. I don't think he believes that. But I don't know that. So that's the basic facts of what happened.
So for our viewers, they probably haven't seen the Patriot Purge.
Right.
What essentially is that? It's a 3-part documentary. You said as much of that. What basically, like, you kind of mentioned that he's trying to, it's conservative viewpoint, basically giving the impression that the left is putting people in prison that's really from the right. So it's not like the left is locking up the left. It's the left is putting you in prison for your using the FBI for your conservative political beliefs. Is that essentially
that is the larger claim, and the basis for that claim is that he suggests that January 6th was a false flag operation conducted by the FBI and not an assault on the Capitol by Trump supporters. And that it's being used as a political Trojan horse down. That's the basic claim. So our piece basically goes through each of his examples for those claims and demonstrates that there's not much to it.
Wow. Is it so? And this might be we might have already kind of hit this in terms of just the lack of confidence in at least media epistemology, but I guess that would obviously extend to law enforcement. I mean, law enforcement is probably taking the lion's share of a lack of people's trust, and some for good reason, some exaggerated. But like the FBI has seemingly been, except maybe in the 70s, with the CIA and that whole, Hoover and the whole COINTELPRO. So that was definitely a stain on the FBI. for they were basically, I think it was from 66 to 71, or 64 to 71, spying on people, planting false information, locking people up. But largely the FBI, I feel like in the 80s and 90s had much more of a cleaner reputation. Even going into, and then I would say even post 9/11, I mean, there was a period of time, which I personally think was a gift and a curse, because when 9/11 happened, it was the first time in a long time that we all felt like we were Americans, and we had a unified cause against radical Islam, particularly Osama bin Laden, who was the face of that, and some of his um, his lieutenants and things like that. There was a point where in the culture we were grateful for police officers and firemen, because we saw them running into the dust of the buildings of the World Trade Center as they were falling, and really and I remember even it being awkward for me, but thanking police officers for their service. I remember just feeling awkward doing that sometimes, because I did have past experiences where I thought police crossed many lines, and I've seen this happen in my life, and have been a part of that. But there was a sense where we're all Americans under Bush's administration. That leads to Obama becoming president, and it seems like, wow, the racial dynamic has really changed in America. I mean, there was a lot of, you had the Guantanamo Bay stuff, and a lot of emphasis on, people who were into radical Islam, and there were less stories and less friction between black people and white law enforcement, right? So there was a sense where entities like the FBI were somewhat like above reproach on some level, especially after 9/11. To make these claims now, it really seems like full circle. Like, that's a really serious claim to say that the FBI is responsible, or partly responsible, for staging something like the Capitol insurrection, whatever you call it. Would you agree with that? Do you feel like
that was why I wrote the piece? I mean, because I didn't say this before. I mean, I was just thinking about what I had left unsaid, and I think when I reference the atmosphere that was created, if you watch this special, which is really just an extension of his nightly show. So if you're watching his nightly show and you watch the special and you believe what he says, you're going to live in a state of terror. And people in a state of terror do crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So if you are going to tell millions of people something that, if it is true, would put them on a incredibly fear-driven, terrified footing, you better be damn sure you're right.
Right.
And not only was there, I want to be precise here, but it's not as if it was just like it's not like he was saying there's a possibility that this element of the insurrection had FBI agents in it, which I think the Justice Department has acknowledged one informant at the insurrection, which is not an earth-shattering revelation. Because the FBI is always trying to infiltrate extremist groups like the Proud Boys, like the Oath Keepers, who had members at the insurrection. So, it wasn't as if he was just saying, this is possible. He was saying, this is what happened. He says in the special, it was a setup. He doesn't have evidence of that. And to go beyond speculation to assertion of something that does not have evidence for it is deeply troubling. I mean, I just don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah, I think there's some, you can get arrested for that. At least I thought you could. I mean, there are levels where
what most people probably don't know is that Fox News's attorneys have argued in court that Tucker Carlson's statements should not be interpreted as statements of fact. They have essentially said that he should be interpreted as, I don't have the exact language in front of me, but I'll find it online and send you the article about the court case. They basically said when he was sued, an average person could interpret him as basically being an entertainer, more or less.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's not
far-fetched. You know,
it's not far-fetched, but right. They're really drastically not taking into consideration just militia. So you think about the conservative militia groups that tried to kidnap Governor Whitmer from Detroit. Like, there are people who take this stuff really serious.
Well, and I should mention, you mentioned the Whitmer case. I don't want to prejudge the Whitmer case, but the Whitmer case is part of concerns about the FBI, because the FBI, there are 12 defendants in the Whitmer case. And I believe there are 12 other people involved, give or take one or two, who were FBI informants.
Wow.
So there are concerns about to what degree did the FBI and its informants move that plot in a direction of action that might not have happened otherwise. Yeah. So again, that's a legitimate concern.
So some degree of
yeah. So again, that's a legitimate concern. It's possible that, those men are guilty of the specific crimes of which they've been charged. But this is the problem with all of our dialogue these days. We don't even spend any time on the nuance. Like, I think Rittenhouse is a good example of this too. Was he guilty of stupidity? Yes. Was he guilty of the charges that he was charged with? I didn't spend a lot of time on that case, but the people that have studied it, that I trust, have said, yeah, I don't think he was guilty of the charges with which he was charged, because the law is the law. If you have a problem with what happened, which I do, have a problem with his moral decision, his judgment to put himself in that situation, and have a problem with the statute as it is written. But, we don't want to deal with the nuance. We want to pick a side, and we want to throw our munitions at the other side. And Christians, we can't be doing that. Like, our mandate is to be salt and light. Our mandate is to bring shalom, to bring flourishing through sacrificial love. That means we die to ourselves and we put the common good and we put the good of others before ourselves. And this is complicated. It's not like I have it figured out. It's not like any of us do, but that's the North Star for us. And I look around and I see a failure of discipleship in the American church in these practices.
Wow. So you run into a guy who is young in the journalism career, and he asked to meet with you for a cup of coffee. You decide to meet up with him, and he wants some advice for how to grow, or how should he think about journalism right now in this day and age. What do you tell him?
Go sell insurance.
What about selling ads for the paper, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm gonna ask.
No, you know what I would say? I would say go into whether you're in journalism or whether you are not in journalism, think structurally and think institutionally. Don't think about personalities. Don't think about soap operas. Think about fundamental, long-term systemic change. And because most of the problems in our politics and our culture are based around incentive structures, which are born out of systemic things. And so when it comes to our elections, focus on election reform, thinking about how we incentivize better people getting elected and better, governance when people are elected. But that is not going to happen by believing in a politician. Don't believe in politicians. Believe in building a better system, because people conform to the structures they are in. That is a fundamental truth.
Yeah, well said. One of the things that I've been saying for years, and Strack, I think now is at this point where he kind of subscribes to this on some level, but we just stay balanced. And a lot of people, I have friends on both sides of the political aisle, right? So, and I can relate to concerns from both sides of the political aisle. So I've always had this mantra, stay balanced. And people would get offended. And because I wouldn't pick a side, they thought I meant be neutral politically. And that's not really what I meant. What I primarily meant was, don't let what's happening in this kingdom make me forget that I'm living for another kingdom.
Right.
And so I need to be careful. But one of the practical reasons, one of the sort of functional reasons why I still stand by that stay balanced claim is because when you choose a side, when you choose a conservative, the rule is, it's an unspoken rule, but you're not allowed to criticize that side.
Right.
You cannot. So if you choose a conservative side, if I'm one of those black guys that says, hey, listen, man, I don't fit the narrative. I think black people are playing the victim, and these people are woke. They're sort of just warriors, and that's where I'm at, right? That kind of Vody Bakum side, right? If I say, hey, you know what though? I do think that black people they do have a good point though when they say it. It's like, whoa, what are you doing, bro? Like you know. Or if I'm on the left and I say, you know what though? I do think. And I'm only using this statement because these are arguments that I battled with and talked about. If I'm on the left, if I'm on the left and I say, you know what though? Yes, I think there is a considerable amount of racism towards. I do not think systemic racism has ended, but black on black crime is a big deal, and we do kill each other a lot. Look at the statistics, or abortion. And man, what you talking about, man? You sound like them. You supporting white supremacy, and you've been, you do from Django. Say Samuel Jackson or Django. I forgot his name. Like, you that dude, right? So you cannot critique the side that you choose. But I'm an Ephesians 5:11 guy, right? It says, expose the deeds of darkness. There's darkness on both sides. So I can't, in this climate, in good conscience, choose a side because I see issues on both. And what it does is it affects you. Like I have very influential friends on both sides. If I chose a side and used the way I think and communicate and went in, I would have soared in my social media stuff and all of it.
Well, that's what I was saying about Candace Owens and those folks. Like that's the profit model.
That's what they do. You can soar if you pick a side and you go. And I can do that. I mean, you know me. I know how to think, put words together. I'm a dog to a bone. Once I see something, I can get it. But what I do is I keep it balanced. I'm busting your head and your head. I'm talking about where's the Lord in your perspective, and then people don't want to hear that, man. People don't like that, and it's really unfortunate, and it's sad. I think to see the state. What the Lord is exposing, I think, is like, wow, this is really a loveless Christianity that is more based what we would call tribal, right? What you talked about earlier, just to take back the country for God.
Right.
That ideology. I remember asking a question on social media. I said, when there was prayer in schools and the 10 Commandments were up on the buildings, was America a godlier nation?
Yeah.
And then one dude was like, no, but I'd rather have that stuff than these people trying to take away and destroy the country and all that. And I said, brother, that's just preferential sin then. Because as a black man, I would much rather be in America now than in the 1930s when prayer was in school.
Right, exactly.
I'd much rather. So it's fun. It's really fascinating where it's just like, you know what? What I want is just my own personal comfort. I want my own, what I think, and I'm entitled to that. So a lot of this for me has been like, all right, I'm critiquing everyone, and people can't handle it. As if the Lord, like when you think about the Revelation 7 scene, do you honestly think that everyone who's in that scene worshiping Jesus around the throne are all Democrats or all Republicans? They all speak English. It's foolish to think that, but yet that's what we people functionally act like. They won't say that they intellectually believe that, but they functionally live that way. And it's been fun to watch. It's been fun to like be able to write things and critique whoever. For me, it's been. But let me say why though. Because two things. One, because I'm from the street, so I've been through a lot already. So this stuff doesn't rattle me. Two, I believe the scriptures and I believe the destination of where we're headed. I believe when Paul says in Romans 8:18, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth being compared to the glory that will be revealed in us. I believe that the Lord isn't trying to defend America's liberty and political freedoms. I think those have actually caused a lot of idolatry and a rejection of what he is. So I think suffering is the way of the cross. And if I'm going to suffer, I want to at least have that as a mindset. Because I think it's coming. I don't think the Lord is trying to protect Christians from going. I think he's exposing how Christians are. And he's exposing who we are, not trying to protect what we've had. And so in that sense, it's like, all right, it's fun to watch. People get offended, and it's like, cool. So you feel like you're on an island sometimes. At least I do. I feel like I'm on an island.
I'll tell you this. I don't really want the way of the cross.
Yeah.
At all. But I think it's true.
Yeah.
And so it is what it is.
Yeah. You know? But there's a difference between wanting it and accepting its reality.
Yeah.
I don't want to suffer either. So I'm not, believe me, I'm not praying like, Lord, please. Yeah. I just want to suffer this week, man. No, I get a splinter and I'm like, jeez, it's like, no, I don't. But I accept that the way of the cross, I accept 2 Timothy 3:12. Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. Like I accept that as a functional reality. I reject it as my desire, but I accept it as the Lord's sovereignty. And in that sense, it's like, all right, I'd rather accept it and prepare my heart for whatever that looks like, even if it's going to cause significant challenge for me.
The joy in suffering comes from the source of your joy, not the suffering itself.
You know Ben Carson?
Yeah.
He said something I found it in a piece that I wrote about him a couple of years ago. He said it in a speech in like Australia. And it really stood out to me at the time, and I have kept thinking about it. He said, persecution, when it comes, will come from the right, not from the left. He's Seventh-day Adventist, so he is a bit of a religious minority.
Yeah.
I think one of the great...
wow, was he speaking politically, or was the right a euphemism for something else?
He was speaking about, the right.
Wow.
Conservatives, yeah. I think one of the great weaknesses of the American the American church, the American white church in particular, is that it has never been in a minority status.
100%.
Like if you look at groups that have been in a minority status, whether it is blacks, whether it is Mormons, obviously Jews, like you look at the way that they navigate politics, they tend to be more principled, especially when it comes to issues on freedom of religion. When Trump said we're going to ban Islam, white evangelicals didn't bat an eye. Most of them didn't. Mormons were like, peace out, bro. Because they've been a religious minority here in America. They know what persecution is like. A lot of white evangelicals, they get a splinter and they're like, persecution. To your point about being balanced, Mako Fujimura is a painter who's a devout Christian. And he has a great term that I really love, which he calls it being a border stalker, like stalking the border between different worlds. You're in one world and you're in the other. You're crossing the border. You're going back and forth. And you're a vehicle for translation. And you're a vehicle for reconciliation between the two. I have tried to be that. I feel like it's been increasingly hard to do that. But that's what I love about being a journalist. But that's what you're describing too.
Yeah, and that's what. Yeah, and I'm trying to navigate that world. I got 3 boys, and I'm trying to help them also by just being their dad and being their friend navigate that world. And again, I think another reason why I have this position is because when Jesus said take up your cross, like he meant it, right? Like you can choose your suffering, but you can't. You can choose to suffer, but you don't choose your suffering. And so it's just like, all right, Lord, this is it. I intend to believe to the end, to persevere to the end, and be like Paul and say, I finished the race. Amen. I can't choose what's going to happen, what I'm going to see as I'm running that race, what obstacles I'm going to have to jump over or climb. I just can only determine whether or not I'm going to finish. And I just see this happen a lot. So it's just like, wow, this is fascinating to me to watch just the country implode. You used the term when we went to the game together, when we talked about you coming on the show and you talked about getting out of journalism, you said this phrase, the country's broken. And I was like, and I've been thinking about that since you said it. And I was like, and again, you always have a vantage point based on who you are, right? As a black man in this country, I've just always felt like that.
And I think I told you I've had multiple conversations with black men who have said similar things.
We've always felt like that. And what's funny is, as broken as the country is, this is the most utopia America has ever been. If you think about from 1607 to this day, this is the freest America's ever been. Yep. This is the best utopia America's ever been. And it is insanity.
It's one of the best times to be alive in human history, probably the best time to be alive in human history. And we are pissing it away.
100%. 100%. All right, John. So where can people, you got a book out that you've written. Where can people find more about you what's your podcast? What are your social media handles? Where can people find out more about you?
Twitter is JONWARD11. The podcast is The Long Game. The book is Camelot's End. And the next book coming out a year from now is called Testimony.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's Jon Ward, Jon, right? So don't go looking for JOHN.
Right.
It's Jon Ward, JON Ward. And we'll put some of those links and stuff in the description of the show, particularly for those of you that are listening online, not watching it live, but listening to it through audio. Means the links will be in the description of the show. You can find this brother. Support him. He's a good thinker. I've known this guy for a long time. It's been a privilege to be his friend. I told y'all, see, y'all think I be slipping. I told you I got friends in high places. Don't mess with me. Yep. Go ahead.
I have a last question.
Yeah.
What do you want to see the Washington football team's new name be?
You know what? I actually wanted to stay the Washington football team. I think that's I think it's a gangster name. I've gotten used to it. I really do. I really think it's gangster. Man, we so gangster. We don't even need no mascot. We the Washington football team, fam. Okay. Because I am leery. You know what I feel like? I feel the way I felt when the Bullets were changing their name, the Washington Bullets.
Uh-huh.
And I understood why they were changing it, because for a while DC was the Washington Bullets,
right?
And I was a part of that, right? We took pride in that name for real. That the Washington Bullets was an on and off the court description of Washington DC, right? But so when they changed the name, I understood it, but I hated it when the Wizards came. I was like, I still to this day hate the Wizards name.
I don't think about it, but I hated it at first.
Yeah, I hate it. I still don't like it, but it doesn't bother me as much now. I support whatever's DC. I feel that way about the Redskins. I think that was such a staple. And then actually, when I think about the Chicago Blackhawks and the Florida Seminoles and other people, they're not changing their name. So there's this pressure to change the Redskins, but a lot of other teams do the Tomahawk stuff. They're not changing their name. So, but I'm leery about what the name's going to be. I've heard like admirals. I've heard someone sent me a link to some other thing that it was just dumb. So it might be Washington Red Tails. If anything, I'll say this lastly. Our fight song is "Hail to the Redskins." I always thought if you're going to change the name, make it 2 syllables, so all you don't have to do much to change the song.
If do you know the backstory to the Red Tails?
No, I don't think so.
See, this is a funny story. You talked about DC back in the 90s, right? Yeah. When you went to Berry Farms. Yeah. You went to Berry Farms, you might not come out.
Sure, yeah. Berry Farms was for a long time, the most dangerous neighborhood in Southeast DC.
Yeah. So now I go swim laps at the Berry Farm Rec Center. This white guy, you know? And I was there the other day talking to the lifeguard, and I was like, what do you think about the name? Because he had a Redskins mask on. And I had just heard or seen or read something about the Hogs. And I was like, oh, the Hogs. I kind of like that.
I would take that.
Yeah, because it's fun. Mm-hmm. It's not too serious.
And it's old school. Reminds us of back in the day.
Exactly.
That's what we were, the
exactly.
Hogs.
But then he brought up Red Tails, and he was like, did you know the backstory? I was like, no. And the Red Tails was the name of the Tuskegee Airmen, the black, Air Force pilots, I believe, during World War II. And when he said that, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So I could get behind that.
I could get behind the Red Tail, especially since we're talking history, since the Washington Redskins were the last team to integrate black players.
Yep. It
had gotten so bad that, was it Kennedy? Was it his chief of staff? It was someone, I think it was someone said, if you don't integrate black players, you have to leave the city.
Yeah.
You can know Washington. And ironically, Dallas was the first team to integrate black players.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
See, okay, so I always wondered if the tardiness on integration was part of the reason for why there are so many Cowboys fans in DC, but now that even adds more to it.
No, so when I found that out years ago, I respect Cowboys fans if you're Cowboys fans for that reason.
Yeah.
If you're Cowboys fans for that reason.
A lot of it is trolling, though.
Yeah, a lot of it is just trolling. And also, DC is just a transient. I mean, most metropolitan cities are transient, but DC is very much transient. So you got people coming in from all over the country that take jobs here, but their loyalties are that. And then you have the facade that Dallas is America's team. Well, if that's true, then they ain't won since 1996, fam. So America's doing real bad. You know what I'm saying? So
they haven't won a Super Bowl since 96?
Huh?
They have not won a Super Bowl since 96.
No, I think it was 90. Yeah, 90. I think they won. So we won. We haven't won since 91.
Yeah.
So we won 91.
NFC East has probably not won very much for the last 20 or 30 years.
Well, the Giants did. Giants and Philly won. Philly won.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
all right.
2017.
Yeah, Philly won. Yeah, Philly won. Yeah, Eagles won their first joint.
You're up in Philly. That's right.
Yeah, so Eagles won, and then the 07 Giants won. They won 2. They beat the Patriots, who were 18-0 at the time.
Wow.
And then they won. So he won. Eli won 2 in the last. So yeah, but that's been it though. The NFC East has won 3 in the last 21 years.
Yeah.
22 years.
Yeah, that's not
great.
A lot.
Yeah. That's not a lot. But when you have the Patriots winning a bunch of them, then really the AFC North has won the majority of them because of the Patriots, right?
Right.
You got Baltimore, you got Pittsburgh in there a little bit, so they've won it. But all that to say, I wouldn't care if the team stayed the same. What I missed though, I missed the fight song. I am a season ticket holder, so I'm not one of those people. I put my money where my mouth is. I put thousands of dollars up every year to go to games. I went to 7 games this season. So this is the most games I've gone to. I was like, I'm going to every game. I wasn't feeling that well to go to the Philly game, so I didn't go. Strat came down with his wife, so I wasn't sure to go. So I didn't go, but I've been at almost every game. So I put my money where my mouth is. So I'm a real fan. I don't be watching it on TV and be complaining. Every year I got to cough up a couple grand to get to me and my buddy to keep these 3 seats. And now we're about to get 4.
I feel like if they do Red Tails, Snyder will be. I feel like now that I know the backstory, I feel like for good reasons and for, kind of lame reasons. Like that's a smart choice. Like I think it would invigorate the fan base.
The story gets out. If you just call it Red Tails and don't explain why, then you're going to be thinking like, man, what are we like, Sonic? And this is his dude, like his friend. Like you have to explain what the Red Tails means. Yeah. Now, some people in this nation right now, they're going to be like, oh man, you just did that because Redskins was a racist. Some people are going to see it as that, but other people are going to take it and be like, nah, this is what we're doing. If that's the logic.
Yeah.
So we'll see, man. I have a feeling it's going to be something really dumb.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure out what can they capitalize the most. I'm sure they've done some testing, like you get a group of people together and do that. I'm sure they've done all of that. And so I just think it's going to be dumb. And I think even announcing like 2-2-22, like I just think, man.
It's been the Washington football team for the last 2 years, right?
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting if they don't go with Red Tails and if there was some fear of being called woke behind that decision. Because to me, that would be like a missed opportunity. Yeah, you will get called woke by some people, but like you've got a very, very loyal black fan base here in DC, and they would be invigorated to the hilt by that, and it would be honoring an amazing tradition after you had a name that was not really very honoring towards the people that we genocided out of this country.
Yeah, 100%.
And who's not a fan of the Tuskegee Airmen?
Right.
Who's not a fan of that story?
Some white folks down south. So
yeah, for sure.
But we'll see what happens. I think they're going to choose a dumb name. They're going to miss an opportunity. I hope not, but I think it would be good if they did. I'm still going to buy tickets. I'm still there. We're trying to get one more ticket next season so that we have 4. So that way we can just have a nice row of like we here. You know what I'm saying? Eat games. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to it, But anyway, man, John, thank you so much, man. It was a privilege to have you on. Got to bring you back on again, especially close to the primaries. We need to have you back on because I just think where we're headed is just we have. I don't think January 6th was as cataclysmic. I think maybe in terms of the practical, functional rushing the Capitol, but ideologically, nah. I don't think
you're saying it's not the end of something; it's the beginning of something.
I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet.
Right. Yeah.
I think they're going to put, police in place so that doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
But I don't think that I think we're at a place in our country where the battle is so ideological, right? It's such a psychological battle. Like I don't even think I think we talk about things in terms of an old sort of viewpoint, which is the age of reason, where things are like people are tribal. And I think people are more drawn by vibes instead of tribe. If you look at what a vibe is an emotional connection or feeling with other people. I think we call it tribes, but I don't think people are even sustained by tribes anymore. It's just vibes. It's like and we went from you need to prove yourself to now you need to approve of my emotional state. So I just think we're in a different place. And this is what I'm working on. I'm hoping to publish something. I have a friend who is connecting me wants to connect me to a publisher to write this book. I was supposed to write a book on race. I didn't want to because I felt like it's superficial. There's a much more deeper issue. And I feel like now, for me, I think I understand what the deeper issue is, the broader context. I think a lot of stuff like The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and different people, The Death of Expertise and different books. I'm going to read the book you wrote, the knowledge book, the Constitution of Knowledge. I ordered it just now.
Oh, great.
I just ordered it because that's the stuff that's up my alley. For me, it is an epistemology issue, but I think we've entered a different era. We've left the age of enlightenment. We've left the romanticism period. And now we're in the age of entitlement. And so we're in the enlightenment, it was I think, therefore I am. In the entitlement age, it's I feel, therefore it's true. And I think a lot of the challenge is we don't know what age this is. No one's really calling it anything. So we're just battling the pieces of it. But we call it postmodernism. That's just not helpful. There needs to be a better description to sort of encapsulate all that's happening in the country. It's not just postmodern. It's definitely post-enlightenment, post-scientific. I mean, now my biology, my scientific reality doesn't matter. I can say I'm a woman in a man's body, and that's truth. now. So I think even I could go on for about this, but I'm working on this. So when you said that about the book, I was like, okay, that's the kind of book I want to read. Right, I'm reading a bunch of stuff, but I would pause what I'm reading to read this and then see how it filters in with what I'm thinking and how I'm processing.
Yeah, so spread the word about that book. Let a thousand flowers bloom on that book, in my opinion.
Yeah. So last question on that. What are some books, if people are watching and they're just like, man, politics is overwhelming to me, what are a couple of books that you think would be helpful to understand just the political system? I remember you told me about a book years ago that was a satirical book. It was like something about whores or something. I forgot the name of it. I have it.
Parliament of Whores by P.J. O'Rourke, yeah.
Yeah, you said that was the first book you read that helped you make sense of like how Congress and how government works. So I have it there. I know I never finished it, but I want to pick it back up. I'm actually working on a project in 2023 called We the People, a musical project. I do these album and the documentary. So I just released Serial Killer Smiling Pictures, which is a sort of a cultural analysis of our propensity for violence and why are we drawn to serial killers? Why are we drawn to violence? And that album dropped, and I'm very excited and happy about the response it's getting. That's streaming everywhere. My next project that I'm aware of will be that. It's called We the People, and so I'm going to be looking at that. But if people are overwhelmed, don't know where to even begin, what are a couple books that you think this is a helpful for you to understand how the political system works? Even if they're documentaries, things that you've seen or read. And if you can't think of anything on the spot, let me know, and I'll make sure to get it to people later.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my bookshelf. I mean, that's how the political system works. I would just, I don't know, go to Wikipedia.
Right.
read the Wikipedia entry on how Congress works, because most people don't even know that. I mean, it's complicated, but it's not that complicated.
Right.
You know what? If you have an audience that is religious, I don't know how diverse it is.
I'm sure it's that we have a lot of people who are believers that follow us.
Yeah, I would recommend a writer named Charlie Camosi. And he is a professor at Fordham University, I believe.
How do you spell Camosi?
Yeah, it's Camosy. And he wrote a book called Beyond the Abortion Wars.
Yeah.
I think he's a very helpful voice. He is
that's tough. Beyond the Abortion Wars.
He's very anti-abortion.
Yeah.
But he is also very anti talking points and black and white thinking on the issue.
Okay.
Like that issue is one of several that's been used by political operatives to lock in voting constituencies.
Right. Yeah.
And you and I both know a lot of people who have never voted for a Democrat in their life because of abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect their conviction, but I don't think that's a very politically sophisticated point of view.
Yeah.
And so, you might read Charlie's stuff and be like, it hasn't changed the way I vote, but it's going to change the way you think. And it's going to reveal the ways that a lot of the discourse around abortion is not honest.
Mm.
Yeah, we had an episode on that last year.
Yeah, we did. But I think that book sounds like something. Would you recommend the P.J. O'Rourke book?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's a great writer. He's funny. I haven't read it in a long time, but if it helped me understand Congress back then, I'm sure it would help other people. So yeah, he's a funny writer.
Yeah, he is. He brings humor into it really well.
Yeah.
Brother, we appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
We could do a whole show about books, man. Just books we're reading. Books,
I know, right? All the stuff we've read and talked about. Shoot. But I'm definitely going to be, you're going to be one of the people I want to pull into sort of my little think tank about what I'm doing, just to bounce stuff off of and say, no, this is dumb. Like, no, this is just, you're onto something. I need that. But I'm in the zone right now in terms of what I'm doing and narrowing my focus and where I'm headed. So my Substack, I'm back on Substack writing again. So my Substack is about to be crazy because my Substack was crazy last year. And then
it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. It's great to meet you, Strack.
It's great to meet you as well, John.
I'm sorry that you're a Philly fan, but we all have our crosses to bear.
Right. We all have it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got a solid identity.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Jon Ward, distinguished journalist. Find him, look him up. We appreciate you guys. Don't forget to get Serial Killer Smiling Pictures. It's streaming everywhere. Don't forget to go to hishypeman.com. Check out what Strack is doing there. He's got the paintings are on fleek over there. We getting ready to place our order. Don't forget to go to kurtkennedy.com. Everything is there. Music, all the links to find me socially, my Substack, Twitter, all of it's there. So don't forget YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the comments that you guys left. I appreciate them. They just weren't really questions that I thought I could pose, but you said some interesting stuff. So thank you for the comments that you left. If you're on Facebook, thanks for watching us. Go to Kurt Kennedy's Corner on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Stop faking or I'll hurt you. I'm Kurt Kennedy. He's Strack the Wolverine.
Yeah.
He's Jon Ward. And we're out of here, y'all. Grace and peace.
Peace.